I have with me once again Patrick Mayfield, CEO of Pierce Mayfield, the professional development and consultancy company. And I'm delighted to say that we're joined today by our special guest, Paul Matthews. Paul is the founder of People Alchemy, a Buckinghamshire-based business that specialises in helping organisations improve their performance through informal learning. And it's this social aspect of learning that we'll be focusing on in today's discussion. Paul, welcome to the Pierce Mayfield podcast. Hello, and thank you both for coming in.
Thank you. Thanks, Andrew.
Patrick, can I start with you? And, well, let's go back to the beginning, shall we? Tell me, how did you first get to know about Paul and his work?
Well, that's very simple, really. When the APMG qualification change management first came on the scene, it was based on a book by Esther Cameron and Mike Green called Making Sense of Change Management. If you recall, that's recently been superseded by the Effective Change Manager's Handbook.
Yeah.
Well, it wasn't long after that qualification was launched when it was agreed that there were certain shortcomings, shall we say, or Cameron Green stopped short in certain key areas such as stakeholder engagement and so on, facilitation, coaching. And Alan Harpham, the then chair of APM Group, approached Paul and asked if his company, People Alchemy, could write a supplementary handbook. Now, many of our listeners will remember that handbook from their change management training and will agree that it was very clear and very pithy, which is unusual in management literature, I think. So my regard already was growing for People Alchemy. I explored their website and I had the first chance to meet Paul in February at the Learning and Technology exhibition in Olympia. And I invited you along to this podcast, and rather foolishly, you said yes.
Yeah.
So that's how I met Paul.
Which is a nice cue into you, Paul. Welcome. I understand your background is in engineering, which is quite a leap into this field. So was there an epiphany moment for you? Tell us a bit about your journey. I'm sure it's fascinating.
A road to Damascus conversion or
That's
something.
the one.
Not really. I think there was a growing awareness of learning, but more specifically when I was working in sort of corporate land, there was a growing awareness from my position as a director of a global IT company that learning in the company had a lot of failings. And as an engineer, I would look at what was produced by the learning department and thought, as an engineer, if I'd built a machine or a bridge with that level of success rate, that would have been rather poor engineering. And so I thought, well, how can learning and development, how can the learning aspects of HR, whatever it's called, get better at what they're doing, get to deliver a more reliable product and produce the kind of results that actually the company's looking to get produced. So I suppose that was really where it came from, was this dissatisfaction with the way L&D was run in a large organisation. And that got me involved from there on into training, coaching, delivering training courses, some of which I look back on now and shudder at the way I did it, but that was how it was done back then. And so things have moved on a lot since, and I've gotten now, I think, to have quite a lot of sort of background information and study in the whole areas of informal learning and the learning that's happening sort of outside the classroom, because a lot of it is.
It's interesting you should mention a classroom, because if I think back to the start of my own career, which was back in the dark ages, I accept, I really had just one type of learning, which was the traditional formal chalk and talk classroom training, as you say. But I guess there was also an accidental, serendipitous process of observation, conversation, osmosis that was going on in the background. So maybe this would be a good time for you to tell us exactly what is this informal learning that you're referring to?
The trite definition is any learning that's not formal. Which of course makes perfect sense given its name as informal learning. Another way I like to sometimes describe it is it's a side effect of life. And as a species, we learnt how to learn a long, long time ago, from sitting around the fire in the cave watching a relative put a piece of flint on the end of a stick and then throw it. And we learnt by observation, we learnt by the stories, we learnt by actually going on the hunt. We learn through experiences,
it was only recently, really, that people started to be put in a classroom and formal training was developed. And actually, in the very early days, that typically was military-based training. I mean, how do you think the Romans managed to line up all those soldiers in a row with their shields held at the same height? That was formal training. And that was probably about the first time that formal training really started to happen. And then it was adapted from the military into the Industrial Revolution when people wanted clones to work on a production line in the cotton mills or later in the sort of car factories and what have you. So formal training or formal learning, as we describe it now, is a relatively recent thing in terms of human evolution. In fact, if we were not able to learn on our own very effectively, we'd have been consigned to the evolutionary dustbin a long time ago, I suspect. Right. So as a species, we're very, very good at learning. We're very good at noticing what's going on around us and learning as a result of that. So that's informal learning. And we're so good at it, actually, that most of us are completely unaware of most of the time when we're learning. Right. It's just out of our conscious awareness. We learn stuff all the time. We learn where the supermarket changes, the baked beans, they move stuff all the time. We learn it quite regularly, where it changes too. But we don't clock that in our minds as something that we've learned. We're just aware of it.
So basically, you're actually going back to what's within our DNA at the moment, if you like.
Very much so. Yeah, right. We're a learning species, and we're very, very good at it, which is why most informal learning is out of our conscious awareness. We're just not aware we're even doing it. So that's why I say it's a side effect of life.
Yeah.
But what actually starts to happen is if people start talking about informal learning, it gets to be a bit like jargon. And if you're talking often to people in a business, it's better to talk about it as in terms of experience rather than informal learning, because that's what people think of. They think of, well, if someone spent 5 years in a job, they have 5 years of experience. What they're really meaning from a learning perspective is they've got 5 years of informal learning under their belt.
Yeah.
So people often equate informal learning with experience, or should do. Okay.
Here's the thing, though. This must relate back to the curricula informal learning. So what's that relationship?
If you look in the classroom you can get a model in order to do something on negotiation or on a project management methodology or something like that. But until you actually go and apply it in practice, there's a lot that you don't know about how that model works in practice. And so we learn a lot when we put things into practice. And that kind of learning is often stuff that we cannot learn in a classroom. So that's the relationship, is that it is very easy in a classroom to dispense models, to dispense specific bodies of knowledge, but actually it's until you get out of it. It's so often said, well, now that you've left university, now you can really start to learn. I'm sure you've probably heard that before. Mm. And what that really is paying sort of lip service to is the fact that a lot of our learning happens when we get to actually do things, when we roll up our sleeves and get active.
Patrick, I see you nodding there. How does this resonate with you in your role as a knowledge worker? How do you personally perceive informal learning and its value to the 21st century organisation?
Well, I think I'd like to make two main points here. This resonates with me because I think it was during the 90s. I had a long association with Tony Buzan and mind mapping and what he called radiant learning. And one of the key concepts there, which was coming out in the early days of the neuroscience of learning, was learning that went with the grain of the brain. And so much of what we do in traditional training is actually quite averse to the way we naturally learn.
Yeah, I get that.
The way propositions are put before us, the way we make it so boring. The other observation I would make is that I think the 20th century made some huge management innovations, but it was very much borrowing from the machine metaphor. I'm interested in your views as an engineer, Paul, but the machine metaphor meant that we tended to put education and training into factories of classrooms. So Ken Robinson has a lot to say about that. And I think that takes the natural process of learning and puts it into a very artificial environment with sometimes some irrelevant learning objectives that don't seem to further people in their work effectiveness. So I think on those levels, both of those levels, it resonates with me very well.
Right, okay, thanks for that. Seems we're talking about the different ways of learning. Paul, in your book, Informal Learning, I think, is that right? Is that what it's called? Yeah. You mentioned the 70-20-10 rule. Can you just very briefly just outline that for us? I'm not familiar with that myself.
Okay. It's not really a rule. In fact, that's one of the problems that's created by it, is people do think it's a rule, unfortunately. It's a philosophy, or a model is a much better, or a framework is a much better way to put it. The idea is that, following some research that was done in the 90s, that around 70% of what people know in order to do their job was learnt through experience or through activities, learning by doing. Around 20% of what they know in order to do their job, they learn socially, through discussion, through conversations, and around 10% or thereabouts in the classroom. So they're not hard and fast figures. The original research, actually, they went out and asked not a very large sample of successful managers how they had learned to do what they do. So there's several things wrong with that, in the sense that they were only asking successful managers rather than unsuccessful managers.
Yes.
They were, the sample size was small, and they were managers rather than people who were at the front line working, or who perhaps were very much in a senior team. And also, of course, you can imagine people learn at different parts of that continuum. If they are brand new in an organisation, they may well have a lot of formal learning to do, and need that in order to get up to speed with what happens there. So it's a model that's very fascinating, because it has helped learning and development in particular focus on informal learning as opposed to formal. And yet I love it and I hate it. I love it because it is helping people focus on the fact that informal learning exists, but it's also misused and misunderstood quite regularly, where people think that this is an ideal learning mix or recipe or a rule, and they must do a certain amount of learning via this channel or another, or spend this amount of time on these types of learning. And really all it's saying is that a lot of the learning that we do is outside of what is promoted and directly managed by the Learning and Development Department, and so therefore it is informal. It's a bit like the healing that one would do is healing that you do as an individual. The doctor can help that, but ultimately the healing comes from within the individual. Ultimately, learning is something an individual does for themselves.
Yes.
All you can really do is put an environment around them to facilitate that learning. Now, you can do that with a training room and a training course. That's putting an environment around them which encourages a certain type of learning. But you can also make sure the environment around them when they're in the workplace is conducive to picking up the things they need to do and learn in order to do the job that's in front of them.
Yes.
And if that's done well, they won't even notice that they're learning.
Yes. Yes.
If that's done well.
I understand that. There's something which is slightly troubling me, might be troubling one or two others, and it's around the word informal. There's something here which seems to be absolutely fundamental, which, if informal learning is to be truly effective, and that's around trust. What do I mean by that? If you are going to empower me to be a self-directed learner, there's an enormous amount of trust that you need to show in me in terms of my ability to use my time wisely. Am I right? Surely communications without this level of trust from the top down are just background noise and will never really be accepted by the recipient. So I got that right, or am I off target?
It's one of the common things that people have as a problem with informal learning is it's very hard to verify what's been learned. It's very hard to know what's going on. There are ways of doing it, but most informal learning is, because it's out of conscious awareness, the people who are learning, it's even if you ask them, what did you learn, they can't even tell you. So it's very difficult to get a really good handle on exactly what's been learned. And also because of that, if something that's been learned is not useful or correct, then that can get passed from person to person as well. So there is that side of it. But of course, that's happening all the time anyway. It's like we can't stop it. In fact, it's good that we cannot stop informal learning, because if we did, our organizations would be dead in the water within weeks, because informal learning is a critical success factor to any organisation, and without it, the organisation would fail quite rapidly. So I think it's important to realise that it is a fundamental part of an organisation in terms of what it does and how it does things. And it's going on anyway. So there's this idea that people say, well, we have to start it. It's already there. You can't start it because it never was not going in the first place.
Yes, I understand.
And I think that's a really sort of critical factor that people often forget, is the fact that informal learning is with us and always has been.
Right.
And it's the fundamental way that we learn.
Patrick, do you want to add to anything Paul said on that? Essential components of social informal learning.
Yeah, I think it comes back to what Paul's been alluding to about the overall environment in an organisation has much to do with informal learning as the motivation of the individual. And I think we're beginning to understand that the way we treat knowledge workers now has to be very different from the way we would treat purely manual workers who do the same activity repetitiously again and again. Knowledge workers need to have a proclivity to explore the unknown, and management therefore need to find opportunities to endorse when they do self-directed learning that can offer breakthroughs. Let me give a local example within our firm. Our digital marketer came to me the other day and reported on some research she'd found regarding latest changes in the way Google is going to appraise websites.
Okay.
Now, that's good because that's teeing us up, making us more aware as we go into the next round of optimizing our website for our customers.
Right.
Now, who told her to do that? Nobody. But we have a value of lifelong learning, and we as senior management try and affirm people when they self-direct their own learning.
Okay. This informal self-directed learning sounds very much like a competitor to Pierce Mayfield and its portfolio of formal training. Do you see it that way? Is this game over?
No, I don't think so. I'm very concerned that we present formal training in... There we go. I've lapsed into talking about training rather than learning. Training is what you do to people. Learning is what you pull from things. But formal training, I think we have got to make it more relevant, and that's not going to happen unless we contextualize it within the wider informal learning.
So this could add value to what you're already doing.
It could add value.
Or will add value, I'm guessing.
And it will continue to keep what we do in the classroom on its toes.
Right. Okay. Maybe to both of you, given your different and distinctive positions in the market, do you see any synergy here then between what you each do in your areas of specialism? I guess that's a yes answer, is it?
I think there is definitely some potential there. The reason, I mean, you asked interestingly, is informal learning the death knell of Pierce Mayfield's formal training program, and the answer is no. And yes, it is a competitor, but it's not a new one. It's been there all along. That's the thing that people are aware of. So now that we're aware of the fact that a lot of learning is happening after the classroom, when people start applying the things they've learned in the classroom, then we can start making that application and making the extra learning they're getting from those activities after the classroom much more powerful when we start to understand what's going on at a learning level after the classroom. So that's where there gets to be the synergy, is to say, well, we can do a certain amount in the classroom, and what we've always done, we can add accelerated learning techniques, we can do lots of things to make that more powerful than perhaps a really basic course. But ultimately, until they put that into practice in their workplace, until they start actually getting the performance gains and using it, that's what the company and the business is after, ultimately, are those performance gains.
Right.
Again, can I give a particular example on that one? My concern more is where we stop with our intervention with clients when the classroom is over. Are we stopping in the right place? Not necessarily with the classroom, but where is our continual support for them afterwards? And also, where's the feedback to what we do? Recently, we had some news that is wonderful, but also awful.
Mm-hmm.
From one discussion in one of Anne Bellingham's Better Business Case courses, we discovered that a client had saved £1.5 million.
Well,
Now that's huge.
yeah.
By anybody's budget.
Yes, indeed.
Just one discussion in a classroom. And good on Anne. But the awful part of that is we very rarely hear about that. So we very rarely know how we can adjust the classroom experience to real performance in the workplace.
Yes.
We must change that.
Yes, and clearly both of you in your different ways, but the same ways, see this as a way of achieving that. It's a fascinating discussion. I thank you both for joining us. You've both given us a lot of food for thought. I guess to summarise, the message is that we can all be empowered to become self-directed learners, and that this type of learning isn't just a feel-good notion, but it can have a real impact on what is an ever increasingly intangible, volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous business environment. Maybe just a brief final comment from each of you. Patrick, would you like to go first?
Yeah, I have found my new association with Paul extremely stimulating, very broadening, and it's part of my own informal learning, I suppose. I just end with that.
Wonderful. Paul, we have to leave the last word with you.
Oh, that's very nice. Thank you for your kind words. It's part of what I see as my role is rattling the cage and throwing rocks in the pond and getting people thinking a little differently about learning, because there's quite a lot of baggage around the term and how it's done and how it really, and compared to how it really takes place. So I certainly see that. And I think that's the great thing, particularly about that 70-20-10 model and other models, that's kind of people are waking up to the fact that learning is going on in a lot more areas and a lot more ways than people think. And we can take advantage of that if we know how.
Gentlemen both, thank you very much indeed. If you'd like to follow up on any of the issues raised in this discussion, or find out what Pierce Mayfield can do to support you in your own learning and development challenges, then Patrick and his team would be delighted to hear from you. Contact him direct at patrick.mayfield@pearcemayfield.com. Visit our website at www.pearcemayfield.com or give us a call on 01235 227 252. Thank you for listening.